Have you ever known a married couple that you really respect? Seems like they have a powerful connection, they've been married for a long time. If you were to ask them their secret, chances are they would talk about habits. Dr. Tim Mackey, the co-founder of the Bible Project, he says rhythms and routines in a healthy relationship actually serve to keep the connection vital. And while I could use this as a jumping off point to talk about marriage, today we're actually going to talk about a biblical habit that's important for every Christ follower. In the early church, after the resurrection of Jesus, we find that followers of Christ regularly practiced, among other disciplines, fasting, denying themselves of food for a certain period of time. Why'd they do this?
People typically fast because they're in a crisis, they are facing an important decision, or because they desire to have an encounter with Jesus. The common thread that runs through all of these things is that fasting makes us aware of our limits and cultivates a deeper dependence on God.
This is Casey Shirley. She's a spiritual formation pastor at Church on the Move and a theology student at Western Seminary. Also, she's a real Bible nerd. I mean that positively.
Fasting isn't just removing the distractions, it's removing the things that we would typically feel comfort around apart from God. And so fasting is really helpful for getting us out of that rhythm of day in and day out normalcy and fixing our eyes on God.
So, the heart of fasting is to physically respond to what God is doing in my life and move me closer to Him. We hear of Christians fasting from social media or all media. Of course, fasting from food is a very physical experience and the only one mentioned in the Bible. Ultimately, though, the question arises, if I'm fasting, what do I fill that space with? Because I'll be honest, a couple years ago, I fasted from social media for 21 days, but then for those 3 weeks, I just read the news, a lot.
Some very practical steps we can take are being in scripture and being in prayer. And then another thing is to divert our attention from ourselves and from our hunger and place it on God and God's purposes. So you could pray through something like the Lord's Prayer.
To see this walked out practically, we talked to Bob. Bob isn't a pastor or an on-staff minister. He's just a Jesus-loving, God-following dude. And earlier this year, Bob felt like God was asking him to go through a season of fasting.
That was probably one of my favorite seasons ever. I ended up fasting for 40 days. I just went to water only. I said, Lord, you're going to have to sustain me in this if I'm going to do it. And He did. But I just read the Bible, and I also focused a lot on journaling.
This idea of replacing something distracting with something that draws you closer to God, it's not unique to fasting. In Philippians we read, don't worry about anything, but instead pray about everything. Isaiah says, don't be afraid, but remember that I am with you. And in Psalm we read, do not follow the advice of the wicked, but delight in the law of the Lord. So with all that, Bob, I gotta ask, what'd you learn?
I was learning how to just abide, how to spend time with Jesus as a friend that's also my King, who also created the universe. It's just a completely mind-boggling thing to me.
So there you have it. Like a great marriage is made over time by seemingly small habits, with the end result being a great relationship, God is calling us to do the same, to draw closer to Him through the discipline and the practice of fasting. Hey, we hope you enjoyed this video. If you are interested in learning more about fasting, we've got some resources here on the screen, or you can check the caption below.